Sometimes the safest place you will ever find is not protected by money, but by the kindness of a stranger. Ethan Walker opened his eyes slowly, still listening to the soft rhythm of rainwater dripping from the cabin roof after the longest storm he had seen all year. Pale golden sunlight slipped through the old lace curtains, painting gentle stripes across the worn pine floor, while the comforting aroma of fresh coffee drifted quietly through the tiny mountain home. For a brief moment, everything felt perfectly ordinary. Then he realized the blanket folded neatly over the living room couch was empty. He frowned. The woman he had rescued from the rain the night before should have still been asleep. Before he could call out, 8-year-old Lily appeared barefoot in the hallway, clutching her stuffed rabbit with sleepy eyes and a bright smile that only a child could wear before breakfast. "Daddy," she whispered, trying not to laugh. "She is making pancakes." Ethan blinked twice. Who was making pancakes? Lily tilted her head as though the answer could not possibly surprise him. "The nice lady." She paused just long enough to grin. "She is wearing your blue shirt." Ethan instinctively looked toward the wooden chair beside his bedroom door, where he had left his favorite flannel after lending dry clothes to a complete stranger the previous night. The chair was empty. Confused but calm, he stepped into the hallway, every old floorboard creaking beneath his bare feet. Outside, the storm had finally surrendered. Mist floated gently between towering pine trees, and tiny drops of water sparkled like glass beneath the rising sun. The cabin smelled of coffee, maple syrup, and fresh rain, a combination that somehow made the quiet morning feel warmer than any fireplace ever could. Ethan reached the kitchen doorway and stopped completely. Standing at the old cast-iron stove was the woman he had carried inside during the storm after finding her stranded on the mountain road. His oversized blue flannel rested comfortably across her shoulders, the sleeves carefully folded to fit her arms, while her rain-soaked clothes hung drying beside the stone fireplace. She moved with surprising ease, turning pancakes in an old skillet as though she had known the kitchen for years instead of a single night. She turned at the sound of his footsteps and offered a gentle smile that carried equal parts gratitude and hesitation. "Good morning," she said softly. Ethan searched for words, but found none. The silence between them felt strangely comfortable instead of awkward. Lily climbed onto her chair and proudly poured orange juice into 3 mismatched glasses. "I told her where everything was," she announced. The woman laughed quietly before looking back at Ethan. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "Your daughter insisted that breakfast tastes better when everyone eats together." Ethan finally smiled. "You were supposed to be our guest." She lowered her eyes for a moment. "No," she answered gently. "After last night, kindness stopped making me feel like a guest." The words settled softly into the room. The old clock ticked above the refrigerator while birds sang beyond the open kitchen window. Ethan poured coffee into 3 mugs without asking another question because he had learned long ago that wounded hearts often spoke when they were finally ready. As they gathered around the small wooden table, Lily happily reached for another pancake before looking from Ethan to the woman with complete innocence. "You look like you belong here," she said. The woman froze. Her smile trembled ever so slightly as years of carefully hidden loneliness seemed to rise quietly behind her gray eyes. She looked at Ethan, drew one slow breath, and spoke the words that neither wealth nor success had ever prepared her to say. "I have not felt this safe in years." 14 hours earlier, the mountain road had almost disappeared beneath sheets of cold autumn rain. Ethan Walker tightened both hands around the steering wheel of his aging pickup as the windshield wipers struggled to keep pace with the relentless downpour. The headlights reached only a few yards ahead before the darkness swallowed them again. Most people would have turned around long before climbing this isolated stretch of road, but Ethan had promised Lily he would be home before bedtime with the groceries she needed for her school breakfast the next morning. Promises mattered in the Walker family because they were one of the few things life had never managed to take away. As thunder rolled gently across the distant hills, a faint shape appeared near the shoulder of the road. Ethan slowed immediately. Parked at an awkward angle was a dark luxury sedan with its hazard lights blinking weakly through the rain. A woman stood beside it, her coat soaked completely, one hand resting against the roof as the wind tugged at her hair. She looked exhausted rather than frightened, determined rather than helpless. Ethan pulled his truck safely onto the gravel shoulder and stepped into the storm without hesitation. Cold rain soaked through his jacket almost instantly. "Are you all right?" he called over the sound of the wind. The woman looked up, surprised that anyone had stopped. "I think my car finally gave up," she answered with a tired smile. "The phone has no signal either." Ethan glanced toward the steep mountain ridges surrounding them. "There will not be one for another 15 miles. She let out a quiet breath that sounded more relieved than disappointed. Ethan crouched beside the open hood, shining a flashlight across the engine compartment. Water had found its way into critical electrical connections. He worked patiently for several minutes before finally closing the hood with a gentle sigh. "It is not something I can safely repair out here tonight," he admitted. "The weather is getting worse." She nodded without complaint, wrapping her arms around herself against the cold. Ethan noticed that her hands were trembling from the freezing rain. He quietly removed his heavy canvas jacket and held it toward her. "Take this." She hesitated. "Then you will be cold." Ethan smiled faintly. "I grew up in these mountains." "You did not." She accepted the jacket with obvious reluctance, but genuine gratitude. The warmth surprised her more than the fabric itself. After a thoughtful pause, Ethan spoke again. "My cabin is about 10 minutes from here. My daughter is waiting at home. There is a warm fireplace, coffee, and a dry place to sleep until the roads are safe." She studied his face carefully, searching for any sign of hidden motives, but found only quiet sincerity. It had been years since someone had offered help without asking her name, her position, or what they might receive in return. "Thank you," she whispered. "I am Victoria." Ethan simply nodded. "I am Ethan." Nothing more was needed. As they drove slowly through the rain, the heater hummed softly inside the old pickup while the scent of pine drifted through a window that never fully closed. Victoria looked out at the dark forest sliding past and realized something she had almost forgotten. Peace did not always arrive in places designed to impress. Sometimes it arrived in an old truck driven by a man who believed that kindness should never depend on knowing who someone was. The warm glow of the cabin appeared through the rain like a quiet promise waiting at the end of a long road. Ethan parked beside the small wooden porch while the storm continued whispering through the towering pines surrounding the property. Before he even reached the front steps, the cabin door swung open and Lily came running out wearing oversized wool socks, stopping only when Ethan gently raised a hand. "Easy, sweetheart," he called with a smile. "The porch is slippery." Lily noticed the unfamiliar woman standing beside her father and immediately softened her voice. "Hello," she said politely. Victoria returned the greeting with a tired smile, surprised by the little girl's natural kindness. Ethan opened the front door, and warm air wrapped around them instantly. The comforting scent of cedar wood, homemade vegetable soup, and cinnamon filled the cozy cabin while logs crackled gently inside the stone fireplace. The simple home carried no luxury, yet every corner reflected care. Family photographs rested on handmade shelves. Children's drawings decorated one wall beside an old-school calendar. A neatly folded quilt lay across the living room couch. Victoria quietly removed Ethan's rain-soaked jacket and held it toward him. "Thank you," she said softly. "Keep it until your clothes are dry." Ethan replied without hesitation. Lily looked up at Victoria with wide, curious eyes. "You can wear one of Daddy's shirts," she suggested. "They are always warm." Victoria smiled politely. "I could not possibly." "You absolutely can," Ethan interrupted gently. "Your clothes will never dry before morning." A few minutes later, Ethan placed a folded blue flannel shirt and a fresh towel outside the guest bathroom before quietly stepping away. When Victoria emerged wearing the oversized shirt, she paused almost immediately. Lily clapped her hands happily. "See? I told you it would fit." Victoria laughed for the first time that evening. The sound seemed almost unfamiliar, as though it had not visited her in a very long time. Ethan carried 3 steaming bowls of soup to the kitchen table. "It is simple," he said, "but it is warm." Victoria accepted the bowl with both hands, feeling its comforting warmth against her fingers. No expensive restaurant she had ever visited had made her feel as welcomed as that modest wooden table. Conversation remained easy and unforced. Lily proudly talked about her school project, the wild deer she sometimes spotted behind the cabin, and how her father always made blueberry pancakes whenever storms passed through the mountains. Ethan mostly listened, smiling quietly whenever Lily exaggerated a story. Victoria watched them with thoughtful eyes. There was no performance here, no expectation, no hidden agenda. Only a father determined to give his daughter a peaceful childhood despite every hardship life had placed before them. Later that evening, Lily disappeared into her bedroom and returned carrying an old family photo album. She climbed onto the couch beside Victoria without hesitation. "That is my mommy," she whispered, pointing toward a smiling woman holding a much younger Lily. Ethan looked at the photograph from across the room, but remained silent. Victoria understood immediately that the gentle sadness inside the cabin had not come from loneliness alone. It had come from love that had never truly left. She closed the album carefully and looked toward Ethan, who was adding another log to the fire. The dancing flames reflected softly across his face, revealing a quiet strength built not from success or recognition, but from years of choosing hope. One ordinary day at a time. Somewhere beyond the windows, the storm continued to rage across the mountains. Yet inside that little cabin, surrounded by warmth, kindness, and simple grace, Victoria felt something she had almost forgotten still existed. The unmistakable feeling that she had finally stopped running. The fire burned low as the evening settled gently over the mountains, filling the cabin with the comforting scent of cedar and glowing embers. Rain tapped softly against the windows now, no longer angry, only steady enough to remind everyone how different the night might have been if Ethan had driven past that stranded car without stopping. Lily eventually yawned, rubbing her sleepy eyes before wrapping her small arms around Ethan. "Good night, Daddy." He kissed the top of her head with quiet affection. "Sweet dreams, sweetheart." She looked toward Victoria with an innocent smile. "Your room is next to mine. If the thunder gets loud again, do not worry. Daddy always says storms sound scarier than they really are." Victoria smiled warmly. "Thank you, Lily." The little girl disappeared down the hallway, leaving the cabin wrapped in a peaceful silence broken only by the crackling fireplace and the occasional whisper of wine through the pine trees outside. Ethan began collecting the empty soup bowls from the table. Victoria immediately stood. "Please let me help." Ethan shook his head with a gentle smile. "You are our guest." She stepped closer anyway and quietly picked up 2 bowls before he could protest again. "Tonight, I would rather feel useful than important." The simple sentence made Ethan pause for a moment. Together they washed the dishes in comfortable silence, warm water running softly into the old porcelain sink, while the scent of dish soap mixed with fresh coffee still lingering in the air. When the last plate had been dried, Victoria wandered slowly toward the bookshelf beside the fireplace. Family photographs stood beside worn novels, children's storybooks, and several old automotive repair manuals with faded covers. Her eyes settled on a framed photograph of Ethan standing beside his late wife during a county fair many years earlier. Both of them were smiling as though tomorrow carried nothing but hope. Ethan noticed where she was looking. "She loved this cabin," he said quietly. "She said every sunrise here felt like a second chance." Victoria turned toward him. "She must have been extraordinary." Ethan smiled with quiet gratitude instead of sorrow. "She taught me that kindness is something you choose every morning, especially on the days when life gives you reasons not to." Victoria lowered her eyes thoughtfully. "Someone once told me success means never depending on anyone." Ethan leaned lightly against the fireplace mantel. "Do you still believe that?" She answered after a long silence. "I thought I did. Tonight, I am not so sure." Outside, another gentle roll of thunder echoed across the valley before fading into the distance. The cabin remained warm, peaceful, and completely still. Ethan walked toward the hallway before stopping beside the guest room door. "There are extra blankets in the closet if you need them," he said. "Breakfast is usually around 7, unless Lily wakes up earlier because she smells pancakes." Victoria laughed softly. "Does that happen often?" Ethan grinned. "Almost every Saturday." She watched him disappear down the hallway before quietly entering the guest room. The simple space held only a wooden bed, a handmade quilt, a small reading lamp, and a window overlooking the dark forest. There were no expensive decorations, no polished marble, no city lights stretching beyond the horizon. Yet as she carefully folded her own rain-soaked clothes over a chair and looked at the neatly folded blue flannel shirt resting nearby, she felt something impossible to explain. For the first time in years, she did not reach for her phone before going to sleep. She simply listened to the rain, closed her eyes, and allowed herself to believe that tomorrow might feel different from every yesterday she had left behind. Morning arrived quietly, carrying the scent of fresh rain, pine needles, and damp earth drifting through the slightly open kitchen window. Long before the first rays of sunlight reached the cabin porch, Victoria opened her eyes naturally, surprised that she had slept through the entire night without waking even once. For years her mornings had begun with buzzing phones, overflowing calendars, and the constant pressure of decisions waiting before sunrise. Here, the only sound was birds singing somewhere beyond the trees and the soft crackle of dying embers inside the fireplace. She sat on the edge of the bed for a long moment, simply listening to the peaceful silence surrounding the little cabin. It felt unfamiliar in the most comforting way. She looked toward the neatly folded blue flannel resting across the wooden chair. Her own clothes were still damp despite hanging near the fire all night. After hesitating for only a second, she slipped into Ethan's oversized shirt once more before tying her hair loosely behind her shoulders. The fabric carried the faint scent of cedar wood, fresh laundry, and mountain air. Somehow it felt less like borrowed clothing and more like a quiet reminder that kindness could leave traces no amount of wealth could ever purchase. Curious to avoid waking anyone, Victoria stepped carefully into the kitchen. Sunlight had just begun filtering through the trees, filling the room with a soft golden glow. She searched the cabinets until she found pancake mix, flour, maple syrup, and an old cast-iron skillet hanging beside the stove. Smiling to herself, she quietly began preparing breakfast. She had not cooked for another person in years, yet the simple rhythm of cracking eggs, stirring batter, and watching butter melt across the warm pan felt strangely natural. The rich aroma slowly drifted through the cabin until small footsteps echoed down the hallway. Lily appeared first, rubbing one sleepy eye before breaking into an enormous smile. "I knew somebody was making pancakes," she whispered happily. Victoria laughed softly. "Your father told me you can smell breakfast before you wake up." Lily climbed onto a chair and nodded proudly. "Especially pancakes." Together they set 3 mismatched plates on the old wooden table while sunlight painted bright patterns across the floor. A few minutes later Ethan entered the kitchen, stopping the instant he saw Victoria wearing the blue flannel while carefully placing another pancake onto Lily's plate. For several seconds he simply stood there, unable to explain why such an ordinary moment felt so extraordinary. It looked less like a stranger visiting his cabin and more like a peaceful memory from another lifetime quietly returning without permission. Victoria noticed him first and smiled with gentle embarrassment. "I hope you do not mind," she said. "Your daughter insisted I was not allowed to leave without breakfast." Ethan chuckled warmly. "Around here, arguing with Lily rarely changes the outcome." The 3 gathered around the small table while warm coffee filled simple ceramic mugs and sunlight continued pouring through the windows. Conversation flowed easily from favorite breakfasts to mountain wildlife and Lily's upcoming school art project. No one rushed. No one checked a phone. No one watched the clock. When the meal was nearly finished, Victoria looked around the tiny cabin once more before speaking almost to herself. People spend their whole lives searching for peace in places that look impressive. She paused, her gray eyes meeting Ethan's. "I think I finally found it in a place that simply feels real." Ethan answered with the same quiet sincerity that had guided every choice he made. Sometimes home is not the place you plan to find. Sometimes it is the place where someone chooses to make room for you before they even know your story. Neither of them realized that before the day ended, a black sedan climbing the mountain road would quietly reveal that their chance meeting had never been as ordinary as it seemed. Edit. The last plates had barely been washed when the quiet hum of an approaching engine drifted through the open kitchen window. Ethan looked toward the gravel road, surprised to see a polished black sedan slowly making its way through the tall pine trees. It was unlike any vehicle that usually climbed the narrow mountain road leading to his cabin. Lily hurried to the porch first, curious as always. "Do you know them?" she asked. Victoria stepped beside the window, and for the first time since arriving the peaceful warmth in her expression gave way to quiet concern. She recognized the car. Immediately, the sedan came to a gentle stop, and a middle-aged driver stepped out, carefully adjusting his jacket before walking toward the porch. He removed his hat respectfully the moment he saw Victoria. "Miss Hayes, he said with visible relief. "We have been searching for you since last night." Ethan glanced at Victoria, then back toward the driver. She lowered her eyes briefly before offering an apologetic smile. "I suppose I owe both of you an explanation." The driver waited silently, while Victoria turned toward Ethan and Lily. "I never meant to hide who I was," she said softly. "I simply wanted one night where no one recognized my name before they recognized me." Ethan folded his arms comfortably, not with suspicion, but with quiet patience. "You never had to tell us anything before you were ready." The simple answer seemed to surprise both Victoria and the driver. She drew a slow breath before continuing. "My full name is Victoria Hayes." Ethan nodded politely. "It is nice to know your last name." The driver blinked in confusion, expecting a completely different reaction. "Sir," he finally said, "Miss Hayes is the founder and chief executive officer of Hayes Mobility." Silence settled gently across the porch. Birds continued singing from the nearby trees, while a cool mountain breeze carried the scent of wet pine through the air. Lily looked from one adult to the other before asking the only question that mattered to her. "Does that mean she still gets pancakes?" Victoria laughed through the emotion gathering in her eyes. Ethan smiled as well. "Around here, everybody gets pancakes." The tension disappeared almost instantly. The driver himself could not help smiling. He had witnessed countless business negotiations over the years, but he had never seen someone respond to extraordinary wealth with such ordinary kindness. Victoria looked around the little cabin one more time, her gaze resting on the family photographs, the handmade quilt folded neatly across the couch, and the blue flannel shirt she still wore over borrowed comfort instead of expensive fashion. "I should return to the city," she said quietly. "There are meetings waiting for me, decisions that cannot be postponed forever." Lily's shoulders lowered just a little. "Will we ever see you again?" Victoria knelt until they were eye level. "I would like that very much, if your father thinks it is a good idea." Lily immediately looked toward Ethan. He met Victoria's eyes for a long moment before answering with the same calm sincerity that had welcomed her the night before. "Our door is not open because of who you are. It is open because of who you have been while you were here." Victoria's eyes glistened. She quietly removed the blue flannel shirt, folded it with extraordinary care, and placed it into Ethan's hands. "I will return it properly next time," she whispered. Then she paused, smiled gently, and added, "if you will allow there to be a next time." Ethan looked at the carefully folded shirt before meeting her eyes once more. Some roads are worth driving twice. As Victoria stepped toward the waiting sedan, none of them realized that the journey beginning on that quiet mountain porch would soon connect two completely different worlds, proving that the strongest bridges were never built from wealth or status. But 3 days passed, yet the mountain cabin seemed strangely quieter after Victoria returned to the city. Ethan never spoke much about the unexpected visitor, but every morning he found himself glancing toward the empty chair where she had sat during breakfast. Lily noticed everything. While finishing her homework one evening, she looked up from her notebook and asked, "Do you think Miss Victoria remembers us?" Ethan smiled gently as he tightened the final bolt on an old tractor engine inside the garage. "I think people remember the places where they finally felt welcome." Lily nodded thoughtfully before returning to her drawing. She had begun sketching the little cabin again. Only this time, she carefully left one space empty beside herself and her father, as though she believed someone would eventually stand there. Early Friday afternoon, Ethan's phone rang while he was helping a longtime customer repair an antique motorcycle. The unfamiliar number almost went unanswered. "Mr. Walker?" a calm professional voice asked. "This is Emma Collins from Hayes Mobility. Miss Hayes would like to personally invite you and Lily to our Community Family Innovation Day tomorrow. She specifically requested that the invitation come directly from her office." Ethan hesitated. He looked around the modest garage where decades of honest work surrounded him in the form of worn tools, polished wrenches, and faded photographs of vehicles he had restored through patience rather than expensive equipment. "I am not sure we belong at an event like that," he admitted politely. Emma answered with quiet confidence. "According to Miss Hayes, you belong there more than most people attending." After ending the call, Ethan drove to Lily's school. Before he even finished explaining the invitation, her eyes sparkled with excitement. "Can we go?" she asked. Ethan laughed softly. "I had a feeling that would be your answer." Saturday morning welcomed them with brilliant blue skies and crisp mountain air. Ethan dressed in his cleanest blue flannel shirt, pressed carefully the night before, while Lily proudly wore the yellow dress she saved for special occasions. Nearly 2 hours later, his aging pickup rolled into the parking lot of the Hayes Mobility Innovation Campus. Glass buildings reflected the morning sunlight, while colorful banners welcomed hundreds of local families. Children raced between science exhibits, volunteers demonstrated small engineering projects, and music floated gently across the landscaped courtyard. Everything felt impressive without feeling distant. Ethan parked near the far edge of the lot, instinctively choosing the simplest space available. As they approached the entrance, several employees greeted them warmly, already expecting their arrival. Lily squeezed Ethan's hand. "It does not feel scary," she whispered. "That is because kindness makes big places feel smaller," Ethan replied. At that very moment, Victoria stepped through the main entrance wearing a simple cream sweater instead of a formal business suit. The moment she spotted them, the reserved expression she had worn while greeting donors disappeared completely. Her smile became genuine, warm, and unmistakably familiar. She walked directly toward them without hesitation, ignoring the executives waiting behind her. "You came," she said softly. Lily ran forward and hugged her without a second thought. Victoria embraced the little girl with quiet gratitude before looking at Ethan. Their eyes met across the busy courtyard, and although hundreds of voices surrounded them, the moment felt as peaceful as that rainy morning inside the mountain cabin. Neither of them noticed several senior board members watching from the balcony above, exchanging concerned glances as they quietly realized that what had begun as a single act of kindness was becoming something far more difficult to control. The Community Family Innovation Day unfolded beneath a brilliant autumn sky, where children's laughter echoed between interactive exhibits and colorful engineering displays designed to inspire young minds. Ethan stayed close to Lily, content to remain in the background while she explored every activity with endless curiosity. Victoria moved comfortably beside them instead of leading from the front, listening far more than she spoke. For the first time in years, employees watched their chief executive officer smile, without checking her schedule every few minutes. She helped children launch small model airplanes, applauded homemade science projects, and patiently answered every question with genuine interest. The morning felt surprisingly ordinary, and perhaps that was exactly what made it extraordinary. As noon approached, a photographer from the company's communications team politely asked if he could capture a few moments from the family activities for the foundation newsletter. Victoria agreed without hesitation. Ethan did not think much about it. He assumed the photographs would simply become part of another community event. Lily happily stood between them holding a handmade bridge she had built from wooden craft sticks. The photographer smiled. "Perfect. Stay exactly like that." The camera shutter clicked several times while sunlight illuminated 3 genuine smiles untouched by pretense. By late afternoon, the event ended, and Ethan thanked Victoria before driving Lily back toward the mountains. During the quiet ride home, Lily leaned against the passenger window, watching golden fields pass beneath the fading sunlight. "Miss Victoria laughs differently here," she said softly. Ethan glanced toward his daughter. "What do you mean?" Lily thought for a moment. At the cabin she laughed because she felt safe. Today she laughed because she felt happy. Ethan smiled without answering. Children often notice the truths adults overlooked. The following Monday began very differently. Before Victoria reached her executive office, several newspapers already rested across the conference table. Online articles had spread throughout the weekend, each featuring the same photograph of Victoria standing beside Ethan and Lily. Some stories celebrated the charitable event. Others invented narratives that had never happened. Commentators questioned why the chief executive officer of a billion-dollar company seemed unusually close to an unknown mechanic from a remote mountain town. Rumors multiplied faster than facts. When Victoria entered the executive boardroom later that morning, she immediately recognized the concern on every face surrounding the polished walnut table. Richard Ellison, the longest-serving board director, folded the newspaper carefully before speaking in a calm but measured voice. "The public has become interested in your personal associations." Victoria remained composed. "People often become interested in the wrong things." Another director slid a printed article across the table. "Investors prefer stability. Speculation creates unnecessary distractions." Victoria looked briefly at the photograph before placing it back exactly where it had been. Kindness should never become a distraction. Silence settled across the room. Richard studied her thoughtfully. Do you intend to continue seeing Mr. Walker and his daughter? Victoria answered without hesitation. I intend to continue spending time with good people. No one spoke for several long seconds. The room suddenly felt much quieter than before the meeting had begun. That evening, while Ethan closed the garage after another ordinary day of repairing trucks and tractors, his phone vibrated with a single message from Victoria. It contained only one sentence. There is something I should have told you on the mountain, and I no longer want fear to keep me silent. Ethan looked toward the fading sunset beyond the pine trees, sensing that whatever came next would change both of their lives far more than either of them had imagined when a simple act of kindness first brought them together. The following Sunday, the mountain road welcomed another quiet sunrise, and Ethan found himself standing on the cabin porch with a steaming mug of coffee, watching golden light slowly spread across the valley. The storm that had brought Victoria into his life already felt like a distant memory, yet the blue flannel shirt she had folded so carefully still rested on the wooden chair beside the front door. Lily came outside carrying another drawing tucked beneath her arm. Do you think she will come today? She asked hopefully. Ethan smiled gently. Sometimes the best things arrive when people choose them, not when we expect them. Barely an hour later, the familiar black sedan appeared between the tall pine trees, moving slowly up the gravel driveway. This time Victoria stepped out alone, carrying only a small canvas bag and wearing a simple cream sweater instead of the elegant business suits that usually defined her public life. The moment Lily saw her, she ran across the yard with joyful excitement. Victoria knelt immediately and embraced the little girl with quiet gratitude before looking toward Ethan. Neither of them hurried to speak. Some moments deserved silence before words. They settled onto the old wooden porch while birds sang from the nearby forest, and the comforting scent of fresh coffee drifted through the cool mountain air. Victoria carefully reached into the canvas bag and removed the neatly folded blue flannel shirt. She rested it gently across her lap before looking into Ethan's eyes. There is something I could not say before, she whispered. Ethan waited patiently, offering the same calm attention that had welcomed her from the very beginning. Victoria drew one slow breath. That morning I woke up wearing this shirt. I realized something that frightened me more than any board, meeting or business decision ever had. She smiled softly through grateful tears. It was the first time in many years that I had slept peacefully. It was the first morning I did not wake up feeling alone. I kept thinking it was because of the cabin, but I finally understood the truth. She looked down at the folded shirt before continuing. It was because someone welcomed me without asking what I owned, what I had achieved, or what I could offer in return. Ethan listened quietly while the gentle breeze moved through the pine branches above them. Every luxury apartment I have ever lived in felt impressive, Victoria continued, but none of them ever felt like home. Her voice softened even more. This shirt felt more like home than my entire penthouse ever did. The words settled gently across the porch, carried only by birdsong and the whisper of wind through the trees. Ethan smiled with the quiet dignity that had always guided his life. A home is not built with expensive walls, he said. It is built by the people who make room for your heart. Victoria reached across the small wooden table and rested her hand gently over his. Then I would like to keep choosing this place, if you will let me. Before Ethan could answer, Lily hurried back outside carrying her newest drawing. This time the picture was complete. 3 smiling figures stood together in front of the little mountain cabin beneath a bright blue sky, and beside them bloomed a single paper flower exactly like the one she had folded during the family event. Victoria smiled through tears as Ethan placed the framed drawing beside the coffee mugs on the porch. Nearly a year later, the old garage behind the cabin had become a community workshop where local children learned engineering, creativity, and the value of helping one another through a program supported by the Hayes Foundation. Victoria visited every weekend, never because a calendar required it, but because her heart wanted to return. Lily filled the workshop walls with colorful drawings. Ethan continued repairing old trucks with the same quiet honesty that had always defined him, and every Saturday morning the comforting aroma of pancakes drifted through the cabin long before sunrise. The greatest miracle had never been that a successful executive found a humble mechanic. It was that two wounded hearts discovered what they had both been searching for all along. In the end, wealth built remarkable buildings, success opened impressive doors, but simple kindness built the only place either of them would ever truly call home.